So first question, it is obvious to all that government has a spending problem and they've overtaxed and piled on fees to an unlivable extent. What is your plan?
Well, this topic of conversation certainly juxtaposes itself to cost of living and certainly the budget crisis that the city continues to find itself in. And I think our plan has to be to assess the current intake on revenue. It's very clear that the city is not meeting revenue expectations to perform its basic functions. We're seeing that in the way the city passed the refuse collection fee, and now you're seeing some of these other fees. But I think largely our plan has to be, number one, to rebuild trust with the neighborhoods and neighbors, because I think what has happened is this collection of fees, this collection of increases has really eroded kind of the not just cost of living, but folks' ability to, I think, trust government because it's moving very quickly. And the second piece is once we have an opportunity to get in the neighborhoods, educate folks about the city budget, what the city is spending on, where we need to increase revenue. I think that we have an opportunity also to work with the mayor and a strong mayor form of government to truly assess where some of those expenses are happening and determine, just like any business, do we have an opportunity to streamline for efficiencies, assess where we might be able to incentivize cross-department collaboration so that we're not double dipping in different buckets to manage a big city. But I think at the root of what we are hearing is that folks are really tapped out on fees and increases, and that's real. I think that cuts across all political parties. I don't think that is, Democrat or Republican kind of concept. What I do think we start to disagree on is the role and size of government. And I believe that the city government has an opportunity to perform better for people in a growing city. And it's 2026, not 2015. Things don't cost what they did in 2015. So we need to work collectively with different units to make sure that the city council has true transparency into what expenses are happening. Can we have any efficiencies aligned? And then how can we actually put a true cost to the voters with some predictability instead of these up and down one-off fees, like Balboa Park, that truly drive folks, I think, a little bit to the level of distrust that I spoke about.
Yeah. And I think, this is a question later, but, with the trash fees, with putting it on the ballot, us saying, yes, we agree to pay fees, and then people kind of feeling bait and switched with the cost doubling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was a very unfortunate, clearly stated error. And, I think the difference is backing up in terms of process, right? That document certainly, folks use to guide their decision making, right? And I think it again is an example, just like with Balboa Park, right? Like the process and the way in which we roll things out, we have to be more intentional and thoughtful, truly transparent. And council members were involved, right? And needed to see that, we needed to provide that greater level of transparency and programmatic rollout, right? And I think again, it's predictability and certainty that business wants, but so do families. And I think, government can make mistakes. You have humans driving government, right? Like, I don't think that they're immune to that. But at the same time, if that does provide challenge, as we're seeing, it's not going to save the taxpayer any money, right, by eliminating this fee. I hate to say that, but we're going to pay for trash one way or another. And I think how we do it, right, I think is I think the element that truly matters, and the city has to get that right.
Will you support Prop 13 taxpayer protections?
I think that we have an opportunity to look at the funding formula and I think it's been very clear that 18 cents of every dollar, as stated, is not enough for the city to manage its basic services. I think that we have to do everything we can to protect home ownership and ensure that we can, as we mentioned right now with this cost of living crisis that we are in, I feel like we go from one crisis to the next, and now we're in this cost of living issue, right? Yes, I think we have to protect that ability for folks to retain in an expensive market their homes. However, I do think that we have to assess within that arena the funding formula, because otherwise we're going to have to continue to have this conversation about whether the city can afford to basically provide the services we're talking about.
Would you move public employees to a 401k and eliminate public pensions? If not, how would you address the city employee pension deficit?
No, I don't support that. I think I was at the city council when they were going through the Measure B debacle. It cost the city more money to address it and then revert back to the pension system. I believe that a pension system is a noble way to honor folks who have continued to provide service to our city, and it allows for recruitment. I think the difference folks need to know is that the city doesn't pay into Social Security like any other business would, right? So it's not apples to apples comparison, dollar to dollar if you're having a business or employees, right? It's not in addition to, right? That is their future, paycheck, their ability to support their family. I think that we have seen, given increase in salaries, right, the increase in pension payments as a result. And I think that's long overdue, and we're digging out of years of lack of investment from previous administrations. And I think we're unfortunately paying the price for that right now. I think this mayor needs to work directly with the pension board and other investors to determine is our portfolio risky enough for a return with the market, right, to help offset some of those direct payments and costs. But I think it goes hand in hand with the predictability and certainty, right, that I think this mayor needs to have with the pension board, the director of finance, the CFO, all of the folks in finance to manage that. But we can't go back on our word to employees who have served the city. And what we have to do is find greater certainty on revenue generating projects, continue to recruit big business, continue to ensure that we can bring the best talent to the city to address these concerns. And then hopefully we have the ability to look into the 5-year forecast and see that some of these bigger balloon payments kind of level off, and we have the opportunity to kind of recover. I will just say 18 cents of every dollar, as I mentioned, in your property taxes stays with the city and the rest goes elsewhere. So in sales tax, a little bit more, but another formula, not 100% stays at the city. So I think that there's an opportunity to look at that, but no, we absolutely should not go back to a 401k model. It was unsuccessful for our city. And I think the pension payment provides greater certainty for what we're looking for.
Would you reduce city staffing, especially city managers?
We have to look. I think there's a disproportionate growth in salaries in the top band, as folk commonly have been discussing. I think that you've seen some turnover, and I think that's ultimately the council's job, right, is to motivate and hold accountable the chief executive, right, of the city. We operate by charter, by the people who have voted in place a strong mayor form of government. The council's role is to challenge and support the chief executive. And what I would do is, when those decisions and topics come forward, ensure that we are making the best decision, right, for the city and for our employees. I would work very closely with our bargaining units across the city to determine whether they have identified some opportunity or efficiency for promotion and growth. But it's very clear to me that we have seen upper management grow both in number and salary, while disproportionately the bottom, right, has remained either flat or grown not at an equal rate. So At my current position, we were able to commission a comprehensive salary equity study to ensure that all of our employees were at their band level, either above or below where we would see them across the market. So the city should be doing the same, and the council should be demanding that as well. I'm not entirely sure that it digs you out of a $130 million deficit, but I think what it does is, again, reinstill that trust I was talking about, show good governance, really provide good faith to the taxpayers, right? That it's not just the top 5% of the city continuing to grow while the rest of the city either stays vacant or grows disproportionately. I think the mayor, the CFO, and hiring the HR department need to really inform the council how it is that its employees are moving forward. I don't think that anyone who's running that is championing to cut city positions really has the best interest of the city at heart, largely because none of us know how to run the city, right? I think what we have to do is understand, champion, and then assess within the budget where it is that those priorities lie. And if it does allow for greater efficiencies, so be it. I think that's a business decision that we in the council can make, but I don't think that we need to dig out on the backs of our entry level city employees.
Would you support changing the way city residents have been asked to pay for trash pickup, possibly changing it to a private trash company rather than a city run business on our property taxes bill?
No, I would not support that. I think I'm running to champion our city and our city employees, and I believe the city has an opportunity to do equally, if not better work, right, as the private sector does. I think that we should be able to compete and provide. I believe government plays a role, and I think that is a fundamental difference between a few candidates, right, in this race. I think is important to identify. I believe government has a role and should play a greater role. I believe that we have to roll it out efficiently and effectively, and that may have not been the case. That doesn't mean we have to outsource and completely remove, right, the program. I think we should do better. I think that it is unfortunate the city actually didn't put itself more into the hauling space in as it rolled out this new program. I have neighbors that are single family homes or 4 units that had trash pickup previously that now no longer do, and they spent almost a month trying to find a private hauler. If the city is struggling with revenue, it should have rolled out a program that allowed for residents to continue, right, paying the city to do that program. And we need to invest in greater green equipment, electric equipment, our employees who have pride in their city that we can control and manage. And I'm open to exploring, in the future, because it is a fee-based, implementation on the property tax bill, how it may collectively look, right? Like maybe there's a measure in the future that rolls out, a collective infrastructure tax, for example, or some other tax that's specific, right? That allows for the city to offset its expenses, and maybe it doesn't need to continue to charge that fee, right, on property taxes because we've been able to recover more in the general fund for some of these other projects, right? I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I do think that it's, as I mentioned before, an opportunity for predictability and certainty for taxpayers to see on their taxes. But I've been paying for trash. A lot of San Diegans have already been paying for trash. I think that the way it rolled out, I think certainly caught folks by surprise and was bumpy, very challenging. And that's been my greatest criticism on it, is that when government does do it, it should do it right. And I think that there is an opportunity to assess how it is that we can do that greater. But I don't think that we should eliminate city workforce providing that service.
So what would you, if you weren't open to outsourcing, what would you have done differently in the rollout to prevent the fiasco that it turned into?
Yeah, well, number one, I think you saw there was clearly a miscalculation in the assessment on where it was the city was already picking up trash. The city was collecting trash and refuse from properties that the left hand didn't know the right hand was doing. And I think that was the greatest reason for said calculation, error, right? It was just improperly placed. So I think we have to have greater operational effectiveness, and I think have a deeper understanding that government should, while it needs to move quickly, has to work collaboratively with partners to ensure that when it does do a program and roll it out efficiently, you have buy-in from community partners and programs. You have a deeper understanding of how it is that the city continues to manage its assets. And I think what I would have done is done a more comprehensive rollout and education campaign with greater community partners, as opposed to just seemingly doing it with one department. And I think that's one of my greatest criticisms right now in how it is that these decisions continue to be made. They're really seemingly made in a vacuum or a silo. And I think we have to reset that level of trust that government has to have in order to operate. And that's trickling down from what you're seeing at the federal government. I think folks are just generally tired of, headline whiplash, and they feel greater distrust no matter what, from school board to the president. And I think you see that in things like trash fee, trash rollout. I have 2 bins. I put it out at the curb. It was there for a month. No one came to pick it up, right? And so if we're going to do it, as I said we should, then we have to do it right. And I think that means investing in the right resources and programs to accomplish that.
Where do you stand on sanctuary cities?
San Diego continues to be a welcoming city as a border city, and we should do everything possible to ensure folks have safe harbor when they're continuing to navigate our laws. And I think we have an opportunity, as I mentioned, with the government to provide safe pathways to assess, how folks find their way to a new life. That's just how America has, in the fabric of our country, is created. Sanctuary cities and immigration, it lives at the federal level, and the federal government largely should, both Democrats and Republicans, continue to address that crisis. But we have an opportunity, I think, as San Diegans, to model that way as a border city, that we should continue to be the welcoming city that I know we are.
If you had to drop out of the race and had to select another candidate to support, who would it be?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Everyone's answered too. I was thinking there'd be the talk around, but everyone's answered.
Oh, wow. I feel that I am the best candidate. However, should that happen, there is a young student, Jacob, you may remember from PLNU,
Yes.
who I find to be the most inspirational, truly organic candidate that has been refreshing. And I've also learned a lot from. So I would absolutely want him to be my next council member.
What is your view on affordable housing that's not really affordable and ADUs everywhere without proper infrastructure planning?
Well, I think we clearly have an opportunity in this economy to build better pathways for folks to live in truly affordable housing. And I think there's a misconception out there that all affordable housing is created equal. And affordable housing there's different ways in which affordable housing shows up and is built, right? There's naturally occurring, there's, deed restricted, there's a number of different ways in which we find units available for someone depending on their entrance into the housing market. And I understand that in a growing city, there's tension around change, and it is largely been at this particular housing level. I think folks have seen abuses and loopholes of state housing laws, right, that have, again, to my previous point, they're really truly eroded their trust in government, right? What was intended to be an opportunity for, vacant square feet on a decent sized property to allow for one or two folks, right, to have approachable entrance into the housing system has really truly created new housing developments, right, on cul-de-sacs. That is, in my view, an error of government. And as I mentioned before, if we're going to do it, we should do it right. It's not that we shouldn't do it, but how we do it. And the fact that in Clairemont, for example, we have these 12 to 15 units on a canyon, on a cul-de-sac, right, where we haven't fully vetted refuse collection, public safety entrance and exit, and what the impact on our already failing infrastructure is, right, I think is an error on how we collaborate, right, with developers. Developers are not bad people. And I think how the government chooses to incentivize and motivate the ability to recover some of those costs without putting it fully on developers will only allow for housing to be more affordable and approachable. I don't think that we should have ADUs everywhere. The law doesn't allow for that. We've been through that. It's been vetted. Clairemont just passed, after a number of years, finally a community plan, right, which I don't think should take this long. Happy to talk about that as well. But I think those are the types of pieces where you can they all add up, right, in folks in your mind around what exactly is the city doing. And while it isn't always just the city, it is the state. The state has taken on a lot of those housing like laws, basically, that has rendered the city, that has their inability to enforce. I think we have to incentivize greater collaboration with developers who have good intent to help us solve some of these challenges, including transportation, infrastructure, housing. Now, on deed restricted units, meaning a developer has secured a specific funding mechanism to help them build a set of housing units, ADUs, homes, apartments, complexes, etc. We have to be able to fund the Housing Commission appropriately to ensure that those units remain deed restricted, meaning they are at the rent cap, right, that the developer said they would, so that we can get more folks into housing. And those, enforcement mechanism exists, but we're the 8th largest city in the country, and I don't think we're well resourced enough to ensure that that always happens. But I do think that there is a greater opportunity for the Housing Commission to play a role to ensure that they remain. Majority are, but there might be some bad actors, and I think it's important that we assess that. The other piece is I've been very supportive of the redevelopment in the Midway District since my time at City Hall. I think that no one would agree that its current state is how they would want it to remain. And we have an opportunity to rebuild, greater assess how folks come in and out of the peninsula, how folks get to the transit center or to the airport or to a future redevelopment of the naval site, the Navwar site. And I think building more housing and more units of different variable types, especially in the middle, will allow for the market to fluctuate and hopefully reduce costs on rent and hopefully costs on housing, which we know is a great concern for San Diegans.
What will you do to support transparent community input with real influence and not just symbolic hearings?
I think I'm a former crisis counselor. I may have shared this before, and I think one thing I learned during crisis conversations is to truly assess and listen to what the true root of the problem is. And I think sometimes it's presenting, symptom is not always right the issue. I think the question I've heard this question a lot, and I think deep down it truly is folks having a lack of visibility into their elected official. And San Diego is a big city. We're the 8th largest city. District 2, I mean, it takes me 20 minutes to drive to the edge, 25 minutes to drive to the edge of this district, right? This is not a small town, but we have a small town feel, right? And that's a good thing in my mind. I grew up in a small town. I know what that does for you know, cohesion and community building, right? We are truly a beautiful city. And I think we need to have elected officials that are more in the community, more at these community events, and just generally accessible outside of City Hall to allow for um, general questions around the budget, or they read something on Nextdoor that's just a headline, that's a comment from someone that's not true, that spirals into something that is completely not right. What is happening? And I think it's like, it's the age of social media. It is what it is, but it doesn't help the feeling of like where we're moving, right, as America's finest city. So I believe and have shared that has done works for me both with my staffing and when I was in the community working for our current elected council member, Dr. Jen Campbell. And I think that we should do more of that. And I think folks want more of that. And I've offered to create a district council that allows for folks to join and hear. The reality is also, though, that folks elect their representative to do the work for them, right? That's what we do. I don't have the time every day to read what's on the docket for Congress in the way my Congress member should be voting. But I trust Scott Peters. I trust his ability, right? I voted for him. I will vote for him because I know that he shares my values and his staff will pick up the phone and answer my question if I have it, right? And I think we have to model that level of trust, right? That we send people to City Hall to do the work for us, right? And we hope that we can ask them questions and challenge, and we may not always agree. I think we can agree on a lot of things in the city because we live in a beautiful city, but we might not always agree. And I think we have to sometimes just kind of settle on the idea that that is also okay. And I think everyone has their own ability to meet and share ideas, whether you've started your own nonprofit here in Point Loma or you have a Clairemont Town Council that's been going for a long time. Those two things, I think, just have to share space with the elected representatives, right, to get the most accurate information. And I would do that if elected.
Would you scale back or cancel Pure Water Phase 2?
I've been hearing more and more. I think I'm gonna look. I'm not an expert on pure water. As I said, I was an educator. I'm not an engineer. I have full respect for the folks who are designing and implementing. I had an opportunity to view when it was first discussed at City Hall. I got a tour of the plant. It's amazing technology. It will save this city in the event that we ever in the future, right, have challenges with water supply. I think that there always is an opportunity in business to assess. The city does it all the time with projects, right? It's clear to me that we do not have a water crisis at the moment. We have a budget crisis. And I think I would certainly work with the mayor to trust the experts on if we have the ability to pause phase 2 without it increasing costs, right, to the taxpayer. Because the other piece of this that I don't have privy to is there may be supplies, with rising costs of tariffs and the unsettling kind of nature of the world right now. Like, is the year-over-year projection that it makes more sense to do it now instead of 10 years? These are the things that I think we need to be asking ourselves. But I'm open to it. I've heard it. And I don't think that we should pause it, though, just because it has impacts on road construction and because of the budget. I think there is a long-term look on this. I don't have information on that, but I am open to pausing it, though, if it doesn't make sense for the project and for the city.
Campaigns require money and large donors want some sort of quid pro quo. How are you handling this? It's probably the issue with the biggest impact on how the city is currently run with developers, unions, and special interests.
I think, again, the root cause of that question, as I've outlined, is folks feeling a lack of trust and visibility, right, into their system and especially their elected representative. As you stated in the question and as outlined by the question, campaigns cost money. And I alluded to the fact that it takes me 25 minutes to drive to the edge, right, of this council district. That requires a need and resources to communicate to voters. And I am proud of the time that I've spent building relationships where folks have invested not in me. When folks send a donation into my campaign, they're not sending it to me, they're sending it into the values and the campaign message that we share. And the laws that outline how folks, should and when they should contribute to campaigns are very clear, outlined by the FPPC. It's very transparent. At any point in time, you can log into, as I mentioned at the town hall, log into the city clerk's website, view all of our donations. And in fact, right now, because we're within 100 days, you can see more transparency on who's giving money and when. Um, I don't have worked at City Hall, worked next to government. I think there is this salacious notion of quid pro quo. It is, I think, over Hollywoodized in my mind that folks have about how this works. It's not how City Hall works. And I think that it oftentimes with the greatest tension, because when folks do get elected, folks don't just get what they want. It's a strong mayor form of government, and city staff has the responsibility to outline projects based on the law. Council members can't just wave a magic wand and have a development pop up because they had a donor send in money, right? That's just not how it works. But they're all relationship based. And I said this before, developers are not bad people. Everybody in this economy has to make money, right? And I think that how we collaborate together to build a finer city, I think is where we can spend majority of our time. I'm not seeing that. I don't think that exists. It's just not how the system works. I think the root cause of the question, again, though, is to rebuild that trust that I've alluded to, which I think is important.
Why are we still subsidizing the San Diego Zoo with our property taxes? Would you support removing that tax, as the zoo is very profitable and no longer needs support?
The zoo continues to be a large revenue generator, right, for the city and our region. And I think the city just has shown, renewing its lease, I think also believes that that continues to be a large revenue generating opportunity for our city. I don't support that removal at this time. I do believe that if there is a greater vision for how I mentioned earlier, we consolidate and assess fees and taxes to provide greater predictability and certainty. I think what you're seeing now is, this has been on property tax bills for a long time. And I think that now what you're really seeing is folks starting to see more and more into these line items that show up, right? So I think it's, for me, less about the zoo. I don't think anyone would disagree that we have the world's best zoo, and that it continues to provide scientific research that, anyone, right, would clamor for. And I think the question is less about the zoo and more about where's the money going, how is it benefiting me, and how can I have predictability and certainty in my own day-to-day life to ensure I can afford to continue to live in San Diego? And do I feel like I'm getting the benefit from it? Those are valid questions that I think we have to wrestle with. The piece that I think is important to note, though, and the model that I support and why I continue to support it, is because, as in the discussion we've been seeing around Balboa Park, the city cannot afford to subsidize regional assets on its own. And I think that the way in which this has been put forward allows for that funding mechanism to not solely be on the city taxpayers. No one else pays into Balboa Park, just the city. No one else pays into bays, beaches, right, other regional parks, just city taxpayers. And I will say it again, 18 cents of every dollar, and then a little bit more from sales tax. That is not enough for us to continue to subsidize kind of these regional entities. So I think until we provide another formula right now, no, I wouldn't support removing that, because I think it's, again, that revenue generating return that goes back to the region that's important.
People are realizing green policies have increased the cost of living considerably. Now that people like Gates admit we're not facing an existential crisis and new reports are proving the models were wrong, will you support rolling back green spending?
I don't think now is the time to move backwards, as I've alluded to. We are a growing city, a coastal city. It's very clear scientific evidence shows the climate is changing and warming. And the city, have invested and have the world's best researchers, scripts right outside my front door here in Point Loma, doing amazing work to work on environmental climate change research policy and its impact on the ocean and our city. Now is not the time to move backwards. I do think that, again, we have to build in that certainty and predictability into our budget to allow for that. But no, I don't believe that now's the time to be moving backward, especially when it comes to climate investment. Our young folks, I spend a lot of time, especially with our volunteers and folks in the community, college students who are very interested. Their number one thing that they talk about is climate change, largely because they are concerned about their future. And I do think that we should be asking the state and the federal government to be finding ways to invest in cleaner, greener technology that is less expensive. And hopefully the technology will continue to catch up. Similar to what we just talked about with pure water, right? Like, I mean, these are technologies that are, that cost money largely because, they're newer. There's a lot of competition, right? So I think the more we can see investment, I think that's a little bit outside the city's purview, but we can't move backwards, especially as a coastal city.
What are your thoughts on how we as a community can address the homeless population?
I think what I've learned, I spend a lot of time talking about the homelessness policy the city county have. We at the Downtown San Diego Partnership, I oversee about 42 employees right now who work directly with folks who are unhoused through coordinated street outreach. And I also have a 24/7, 365 safe sleeping shelter. And I think where we truly have gone wrong, I see it every day, is this greater coordination between different levels of government, because folks are not just homeless. There are a number of different issues, and they're each individually unique to the one person. Not like majority of folks who are unhoused are not addicted to drugs, as has been previously alluded to. They're not stealing, but there is a certain portion of folks who have been what I refer to as street resilient and developed a way in which they have found themselves the ability to survive on the street. And that includes not finding resources appropriate, continuing to abuse and use drugs and alcohol. And I think that the county has to step in to do more to address those issues with the state. And those paths have been outlined. The county is just not taking advantage and turning those levers as quickly as they need to. San Diegans generally care. We're caring people, as I've alluded to. We see someone here on the corner with a sign. Folks don't have a visceral reaction to that. I mean, they generally feel like government has failed, which is a theme that we've been talking about, but also they want to help. And I think what we have to be able to provide is a greater sense of connecting the resources. That's government's role. I believe government plays a role in that, right? And I think it's important that we have the ability to connect people to resources when they need it most. We did that when we didn't have a 911 system, and we created a 911 system. And now look at the way in which technology has grown, right, to support folks in an emergency. I believe the government has an opportunity to do something similar, not even just with folks who are unhoused, but who need care. We've seen that in fires and rent assistance, right? Domestic violence, ways in which folks can access the system. And I think what people continue to see again, time and time, is a failure of government. And I see it every day. And we have to be able to find ways to get folks into mental, behavioral, physical health care easier. And yes, get them housed, but not everyone's ready for housing right away. And I think that is an important piece, that housing, yes, ends homelessness, but I've seen it that housing doesn't end homelessness for some folks because they get into four walls and they don't know how to work proper utilities. They don't understand social norms on working with your neighbor, paying rent, and then they get evicted and don't know who to call. So there has to be a greater ecosystem that we're talking about, and not at the pace that the county has been doing it. So how we show up is continuing to ask more from our elected officials and provide systems and structures that I think help.
What are your thoughts and plans regarding the proliferation of bike lanes?
I saw a quote about some number of millions of dollars spent just on planning for bike lanes. I believe 30% of what I read on Nextdoor sometimes. And I think I'm interested in assessing this resurgence of hatred in bike lanes. And I don't believe that it truly has anything to do with the bike lane. I think it has everything to do with lack of trust and faith in government delivering, right, for taxpayers. The way in which the city provides funding for street resurfacing projects or street redesign projects is often through state funding. And that's largely, as I've mentioned, because the city can't afford to continue to do street resurfacing or redesign projects, right? We don't have endless amounts of money to do that, right? So the funding we're talking about has largely been allocated by the state to provide for carbon neutral, green design, car alternative transportation. And with it comes a design, a resurfacing, etc. It's not like the city had $150 million and decided that it should go towards bike lanes. That's just not how the city works. They go after funding that supports staff time, other additional projects that are included, and then includes redesign. I don't ride a bike. I also don't believe that we should be turning off projects for folks who do want to get around the city more. I've been to plenty of European cities where cars and bikes share, right, a road. In fact, some of the people who are probably complaining about them have also done that. And they find it to be fine when they're in Europe, but have a problem with it here in San Diego. We should do better, though, when we deliver a project consistent to what I've been saying, right? If you're going to put in bike lanes on West Point Loma, don't have them end immediately while cars are turning right so that you create a problem for cars and bikes, right? I think it's the how, right, piece that we can do better at. And if folks have a problem with the way that money's been allocated, they should talk to the state.
Will you prioritize public safety, fire, brush clearing, police, and infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, storm drain spending in the budget?
I think we continue to see wildfire season 12 months out of the year now, and it's extremely important we prioritize brush management and work with our public safety experts at the state level and at the local level to ensure we have the adequate resources to defend against fires. It's extremely important that we are, as mentioned, monitoring climate through this new technology to ensure we're, like I said, ahead of the curve. I'm also the older brother of a police officer. As I've mentioned, public safety is extremely important to me. It's personal. And I think it's nonpartisan that everyone wants to live in a clean and safe neighborhood. How we do that, we may find different pathways. And I believe we should absolutely invest in our fire, lifeguard, and police department more so that we can provide greater safety. We are America's safest big city. We continue to be. How we do that in a way that is, how we do that, I think, is important in a growing city. But absolutely, we should continue to invest in it, especially in newer technology. I've been very supportive of, the new kind of ways in which drone mapping can forecast, right? Brush clearing, brush management. But I would rely very much on the experts that exist, the experts that are there, the technology that exists to, see if that works for us. I know Chula Vista or La Mesa one of the smaller cities in the region is doing more drone response with 911 calls. And what I think it allows for is the responding officer to have visual insight instead of just a dispatcher, visual insight into the scene, what's happening, and provides a level of calm, right, that is different than just words instead of what your brain is telling you is happening. I think we should absolutely work with the experts like that to ensure we can do more to provide a safer city.
Do you support keeping the 30-foot height limit along the coast, especially in the area that was affected by the 2020 Measure C?
I support retaining the 30-foot height limit along the coast as outlined. I do not support keeping the 30-foot height limit in the Midway District as I authored that first measure with bipartisan support from Councilmember Chris Cate's office at the time, with support from the community, largely because the Midway District does not block any views. I think I am extremely disheartened by a small number of folks who have continued to fight the city, especially the second go around on that. I believe that hampers the same budget conversation that folks are asking the city to address. It absolutely has the ability to provide greater revenue, greater connection to, as seen in the district, transit at Old Town, Navwar facility, and the airport. I absolutely support the 30-foot height limit outside of the Midway District. I think that's been very clear. That's been, it's very governable. I understand its origins. I think the Midway District is different. And I think it's also important to note that the question earlier about affordable housing, what's now going to happen on these developments is you're going to see more of those funding formulas take away from greater mixed use opportunity because folks are going to build more with state law right above the 30-foot height limit. Whereas if we had the ability to maybe build modestly as outlined in the community plan at 40 feet in the Midway District, 45 feet in the Midway District, right? You can finance that project a little bit different as opposed to using the density bonuses, right, for affordable housing to go above 30 feet. The 30-foot height limit in the Midway District, I think, had an opportunity limit, I think, hampered the ability to do that commercial growth. And I hope that there's an opportunity to revisit it.
What is your stance on short-term vacation rentals and vacancy tax?
The recent second home vacancy tax as proposed, I've been supportive of and believe that vacant homes, if you can afford to leave a vacant home empty, I think you can afford to pay a little bit more to help us offset what we've been talking about in terms of our greatest challenges in the city. And I think folks should be incentivized by that to do more with their home. I think as shown, I think I've been very supportive of short-term vacation rentals. And I actually have family who visits occasionally. And I am, as mentioned, an older brother and have a 3-year-old and a soon-to-be 1-year-old niece. When they visit, it's very hard for them to stay in a hotel room. They need a kitchen, they need space, they need to run in the backyard. They're up early, they go to bed late, right? And I think it provides a different level of experience for our city. We should not turn off any revenue-generating projects and programs right now. The TOT that short-term vacation rentals does provide helps offset some of the budget conversations we've been having. So I've been very supportive of short-term vacation rentals, including whole home rentals. I do add, though, however, that folks who talk about reducing that program, I think, underestimate the market that will be created where the city has the inability to enforce, right, if the platforms remove themselves. We've saw what lack of regulation does. I think we need to be able to ensure folks are regulated, paying their license, and also it is cost recoverable, has to be cost recoverable, but that we have to do more to enforce, some of these bad home actors. I don't think the platforms themselves provide for bad actors, but I think we have to be able to bring city platforms and the homeowner together to ensure that we're doing more to ensure the communities remain safe and clean, as alluded to. I do think there is different, as you see in Mission Beach, the city should continue to provide 2 or 3 trash pickups, because I think we know short-term vacation rental behavior is different. And I think this is where government has an opportunity to do more. And that's why I support government intervention and regulation, because it should have the ability to understand those nuances and provide for folks who live here and stay here as opposed to vacationing here, right? The patterns are different, and they should not be having a loud party at 2 a.m., 1 a.m., right? The city should make sure that that program is conducive to everyone. But it does provide, as I mentioned, revenue into our city, which I think is important. And it's a beautiful city. People want to come visit us, and we should have that opportunity.